Happy Wax on Wednesdays. Today I'm showing a painting that I actually did a little bit over a year ago. I believe the episode for Wax on Wednesdays for this one was November 17th. And I did a little larger piece that I don't normally do on Wax on Wednesdays. I usually keep to the smaller boards to fit everything there on the camera so you can see. But this is a 24 by 24 and it was with the gel press plate applying the patterns and transfers directly onto the wax. So this painting has been curing for a little over a year now, and in order to go ahead, I'm going to create a painting right over top of it, and I can utilize that same encaustic wax that's already on the painting, just warm it up a little bit and go. And I can add more layers of wax, which I will throughout this painting. I'll add additional layers of encaustic wax and also pigment. And I like to use these RNF pigment sticks, but I could use pan pastels, I could use encaustic paint, I can use basically any medium that you can imagine except for acrylic paint to add to this encaustic painting. And I'm going to completely change this, which is why I showed the picture in the beginning of the painting, just to remind you of what it looked like. And I'm going to completely convert it to another painting. I wanted to make some changes, and I'm going to do just a landscape right over the top of this. And I'm using all oil stick and making some extra marks here with the clay tool. And this angle, you can't really see over the top of it very well, but on this angle you can see really well the fusing with the torch and how I'm fusing it just to a glisten. You can actually see the shine from this angle and see the wax come to that shine and not move or break up that pigment and then solidify again. So I thought it was a great angle just for this one video this week, and here it starts. You can see that I'm fusing just until that wax comes to a shine or comes to a glisten, and then removing the heat from that area before my pigment begins to break up. So by doing this, I'm actually setting my pigment into the wax, and throughout this process I am going to add additional layers of clear wax medium, and every layer of pigment or medium that I add to this painting I go ahead and fuse in with that torch, and that way every single layer is bonded with the layer below it, including bonding with the painting itself below, which is why I warmed it up a good bit before I actually began painting again, got that wax activated and warmed up, and that way it can bond with the layers that I add, additional layers that I add on top of it. And this is how I work through my process on larger pieces with these oil paint sticks. And the paint sticks that I'm using are actually equivalent to oil tube paints minus the linseed oil. They're oil paint in a stick form, which makes them really easy to apply. You don't need that linseed oil, that extra added linseed oil that is in the oil tube paints when you're painting with encaustic. And mostly when I'm painting, I'm moving this pigment around with my gloved hands, and that is how I work through my process. My landscapes are always very abstract, and I work most of the pigment in with my hands. Sometimes at the end of the painting, I will add some final details in with a very stiff brush and go ahead and fuse those layers in as well. But most of the bulk of my paintings are done with my actual hands when it comes to encaustic and rubbing this pigment in. And you can see I'm just really rubbing it into the surface there, and that's how I do my blending, and my mixing is all done by hand. And here I'm adding just another layer of clear. Every so often I add another layer of clear wax on top of the pigment layer to seal that in and start a fresh layer. And even though I'm adding this additional pigment, the ratio of pigment to wax is still very low here. I'm using just a little bit, goes a very long ways when it comes to the oil paint sticks, and I'm rubbing it, really rubbing it into the surface and not adding large bulky layers of oil paint here. It's very small and just rubbing that pigment into the surface, and the wax ratio is still very high compared to the pigment. So that's a little peek into my process here in the studio, and I hope that you really enjoyed Wax on Wednesdays. You can always join Wax on Wednesdays project group on Facebook, and I'll leave the link down below. Have a happy Wax on Wednesdays, and we will see you next week.